Hanging with Higgins, where author and former prosecutor John J. Higgins interviews his intriguing guests about their lives, knowledge, experiences, and projects. Explore, learn, and be entertained. Come, join us now. Good evening, and welcome to Hanging with Higgins. I'm your host, John J. Higgins. Tonight, I have a fellow author and co-owner of a small independent publishing company, Stark Light Press in Canada. I'm going to have her share her experience becoming an author and how she became a publisher. She has been involved with the writing and publishing of a number of anthologies, science fiction stories, some fan fiction, and even poetry. She has written 2 screenplays that were made into films. Additionally, she has extensive blogging experience, writing about health and biochemistry topics, and even about the African nation of Rwanda. I want to welcome you, Virginia, to my show. How are you this evening?
I'm pretty good. How about you, John?
I'm good. So, you're from British Columbia, Canada.
Yes.
As someone who's never been out that way, what is it like?
Well, it's absolutely beautiful. It's gorgeous. Right now, there's a lot of environmental things that are changing a lot, which is a shame because it's absolutely beautiful. And 10 years ago, it was pristine. So I'm going to choose to remember it that way.
Yeah, we've had that out. When I was first born in New Jersey and first, growing up, there were a lot of farms, and now our farms no longer grow corn and wheat; they grow McMansions. So I certainly understand that. And was it like, mountainous with trees and that sort of thing, or is it like, the plains? Well,
this is the thing with Canada that a lot of Americans I've noticed misunderstand is that the provinces are huge. So BC, it has all sorts of different sorts of territory in it. Like it has mountains, it has a whole bunch of coast and coastal mountains, which are different, and it's got valleys full of fruit and lake country and pretty much right up into tundra and Arctic wonderland sort of thing, if you're into that.
So it's a wonderful kind of expanse out there.
It is. It's pretty much nearly anything except out-and-out prairie, because you do have to kind of cross the border into Alberta to get the rolling prairie and endless sky sort of phenomenon.
Okay. Yeah, no, I know your provinces are very large. You're like, you have a bunch of Texases up there.
Yeah.
Certainly not little New Jerseys.
Yeah, definitely.
So, how did you get involved with writing?
Well, I've always written, but I didn't have any real intention of getting into publication. I was pretty secretive and private about my writing. But I would tell people about my stories, and I would just have these ideas for stories and tell them to people. And what actually happened was a weird piece of synchronicity, because I was telling a friend about these stories, and she was telling her friends about my stories, and one of her friends to be a movie producer. And so he actually asked me on several occasions if I could write some of these things down for him in the form of a script. And at first I just laughed at him because I was like, I don't know how to write a screenplay like that.
Right.
I can't do that. And he was like, you know what? Just you can write it down and I'll put anything technical in. Just please, could you do this? And then he ended up having some policemen come to his door who are friends of his. And they were like, yeah, if you have someone who will write a police drama sort of script, we'll lend you our cop cars and all our equipment. And if you want any actors for it, we'd love to be in it.
Wow.
Yeah. So then he was like, could you write something with cops in it?
Right.
And so I wrote the first one, Blind Eye, and it started off with a Chinese whorehouse is how it starts off. And a whole bunch of stuff about Chinese mythology and things got thrown in. I originally wrote it as a short story, so it had a lot more in it. The producer took it to a friend of his who happened to be Chinese.
Okay.
And the guy said, this is amazing. This is exactly what I was looking for, and it has all this culture in it, and this girl has a great grasp of the culture. He kind of thought I was Chinese, actually. So then he just gave the producer a whole bunch of money, and it went off to the Cannes Film Festival, and from there.
Wow. So we had a similar experience with the police out of Toronto, Canada. We were doing this anti-bias crime play. They had a couple of police officers that came down that were observing what we were doing. And we did this exchange program with them. And the police up there actually created, with the schools up there, a couple of plays that were anti-bias crime from their perspective. Every area's got its different kind of problem when it comes to bias kind of crimes. So I was really impressed that they were able to do something like that, because that's not a typical law enforcement operation. I mean, we were the Attorney General's office, so law enforcement was one piece of what we did. It wasn't a police, force that was all they did. So that's pretty progressive of them being interested in, producing TV.
Well, it does seem to be something that the police in Canada are interested in. I did a couple of shorts about two cops sitting in a car during a stakeout. And I ended up telling two police officers about this, and, they were so excited. And this was all the way in Vancouver, so totally different area of the country. They were right on board with it. And the same thing, they were like, if you ever need help, if you want technical information, if you want to see about using a car sometime, just let us know.
Well, you can't get any more cooperative than that, right?
No, you really can't.
I mean, it seems like you just went jump-starting into going from the stories you had into screenplays. Did you take any courses in school on writing? Was it you all self-taught, or how did that all work?
I took, I think, creative writing in high school. I took, advanced placement English literature. That was about it. Okay.
Roughly about what age did you start writing?
Well, I always told stories. Even when I was very small, I would have elaborate stories that I would have, and I would explain things very clearly about it. And then after I learned how to actually, hold a pen and stuff, I just kind of progressed to doing that. So pretty young. Yeah.
Well, that means you certainly had the creative spark within you. Now, were you shy about, because you say you're telling stories, were you comfortable enough to tell other people the stories, or did you kind of just keep that to yourself?
No, I always kind of just assumed that, of course, people would want to hear them. I was very presumptuous all along.
Okay.
I did try to be shy in grade 1. I thought that maybe the shy kids had the right idea, so I spent the first week of school trying to be shy, and it didn't go well. It's way too friendly to do that, so.
Okay. Well, because, writing is such a solitary kind of thing when you do it, that my instinct has always been that most writers were very much introverted, but bumping into some people who really weren't. That's why I have an interest in it, because I like to know what makes people tick.
Well, I think there's the difference is being a storyteller or a writer. Because, you look at, I'm Irish mostly, and it's an oral tradition in Ireland.
Yeah, that's very true.
You don't have a bard who's going to be an introvert. He goes out, he's comfortable. And I use he because generally they were men, but, the women had a powerful part in the oral traditions as well. And I think that certainly does play a part, because I come up with these ideas, and I'll spin out a story just for fun out of nothing. And then if I think of it as an afterthought, I'll also write it down.
Well, I think I'm kind of similar to you. I don't know that I've always told stories to people as much as certainly had the ability that I could see two various things going on and create a whole story from whatever I see or pops into my mind.
Yeah, exactly. It's that what-if factor, and your mind's always what-ifing at you.
Yes, very much so. You've done these screenplays. You've written along at the same time, or after you did the screenplays, did you go back to primarily writing again?
Well, when the screenplay thing happened, it happened very much all at once, and there was all this excitement around it because all these people jumped on board, and the producer had never had anyone actually take any interest in his ideas before. He was a very small producer, so getting any substantial backing and stuff was very exciting. Getting off to Cannes was exciting, and he asked me if I could have about 10 screenplays for him when he went to Cannes to pitch to people.
Wow.
Yeah, so I spent a week writing 10 screenplays all at once, so I didn't write anything else during that time. And I think I actually broke something in my brain by doing that, because for about...
I would think, I can't imagine anybody writing 10 screenplays at the same time, much less in a week.
It was crazy. And like when I was done, I had lost my sense of humor for about a month.
Yeah, I can see why.
I had a cerebral sense of humor, like someone could tell a joke, and I'd be like, yes, that is funny. But I couldn't, like, I didn't think to laugh.
Wow.
And yeah, so that was interesting, because to me, like, you talk about your interest in the writing process, and I did not know that you could actually break your funny bone, but you can, so be careful.
Oh, yeah. I don't know how people do humor, to be honest with you. I think that's a whole different other kind of talent.
Having humor?
Writing humor.
Oh, writing humor, I see.
I mean, I can be very funny, but my humor is always more reacting off something going on in front of me.
You're one of nature's straight men.
Right. Or I don't know if it's always straight, but I can make the comments, or if I have to come up with something like a joke, or, oh my God, I would be absolutely lost. I can't even remember them. You can tell me the same joke, like every other day, and I'll be like, I won't remember the punchline. So it's new to me again.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I'm not a big joke teller myself. Usually what I try to do is I actually try to remember like 5 jokes and just memorize them. So if called on, I can say some jokes, because it's the same as asking me to just talk. Like, I'll just freeze in place. It's like deer in the headlight. And
when I was in court, I always had, like, the first 30 seconds prepared in my head. I used to say I did a disconnect.
Oh, yeah.
I left my body when I first started talking, so it took me about 30 seconds to get back in.
Well, that's such a hassle, too. You have to climb in. You have to, look through the eyeballs, connect with the mouth. Oh.
Absolutely, and you have to understand when you're standing in court, when you pop out, you have to make sure you're clothed, because you could offend the court and you could be held in contempt.
Try explaining that.
Yeah, you see, you and I would be dangerous, because the brains kind of work off one another.
Yeah.
So these 10 screenplays, and I'm really impressed that somebody could write 10 screenplays. I know people who struggle with these things for years. What genre were they?
A whole range. I wrote some horror ones. I wrote a Western. It was a haunted Western. It was actually pretty cool. And yeah, I wrote like 4 horror ones. The horror ones were the easiest ones. I wrote a romantic comedy.
Wow.
I'm trying to remember the rest. I wrote another cop drama, which like I just called the one blind guy that I wrote. I called it cop drama all the way through writing it.
Right, you didn't have a title. I
No,
understand that.
It was actually the producer who named it. I was like, sure, you can't just go with cop drama.
Well, some of the things I really struggle with in my writing is titles and names.
Oh,
Those are the things that freeze me up. I wish there was just an easy way for me to be able to develop that quickly, but sometimes it'll be Sally through most of the book, and I go, I don't like Sally.
Yeah.
It'll be Samantha, and I have to do a global replace of whatever the name is to make that work.
Yeah, some people have a gift for names, and sometimes I'll know the name of the character right off, but other times not so much. I can totally identify with that. Right.
And I mean, my published works are really about Archangel, so it's really not Sam, Joe, George.
No, it's just like Samael and...
Right, exactly. Luciferel and Jeremiel. And actually, that was one of the things I worried about, because I was going, oh, my God, nobody's ever going to get these names right.
Yeah.
But eventually it does stick, so that's the good part, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think with an increase in movies like the Game of Thrones, being translated from a book to a movie, I think that sort of thing does give people a bigger tolerance for names they don't understand.
That's true.
Yeah.
Well, the example I use in my head were the Ninja Turtles. If little kids could remember Michelangelo,
yeah, it's true.
I figured that it's possible that it will become normalized.
Yeah, if the character behind it is strong enough, because that's what the Mutant Ninja Turtles have going, is just they're really strong archetypal characters, and that kind of burrows into kids' brains and sticks there.
Right. So what is your sense about archetypal characters? Because that's one of the things I try to stick to too. Is that I think that's to me writing. You have to like have the archetypal characters. You have to have the same kind of flow of a story that people are somewhat comfortable with or used to. But then you've got to put the twists in. I mean, that's generally the way I view all of that. How do you do yours?
Okay, well, honestly, I don't put a lot of thought into the structure of my stories.
Okay.
I have talked to people who do things very traditionally, who have criticized my kind of flow to my stories, which is fair, but I have a hard time with that. So usually I just pretty much vomit onto the page.
Okay.
And I have a lot of really intense sources that I get the stories from. Like I have a lot of dreams that I'll just like transcribe right onto the paper.
Okay.
And I'll do things like from sources like that. And so the archetypes, they're either there or they aren't.
Okay.
Is it my very roundabout way of saying that?
Right. Well, I'm certainly not one of these plotters that have every detail of something down. I have generally when I'm writing now, what I do is I have the ending point pretty much in my head where I want to go, and then I have the beginning, and then I know that there's certain points I have to hit as it goes along. One of the things I do try to do is make sure that I get comfortable with the characters, only because they write the story if I get them in the right place in my head.
Oh, I totally agree. And I'm very character heavy. For me, the character is the king of the story. And there's a lot of people who tell me things like, oh, you can't let your characters boss you around. You have to, do things to hurt them and do these things to them.
Well, I don't know that we really hurt our characters. We just put them in very difficult spots, right?
Yeah.
and that's what makes it interesting. It's like, okay, how would you handle this, right?
Yeah, and I have one character. She's one of my main characters. She's in my science fiction novel. Her name's Sasha, and she's super nice. She's very easygoing, and I had to try to find a way to get her into a fight.
Okay.
And I had such a hard time with it. I was like, what are her buttons? And I finally had to just boil it down to that, of what buttons can I find of Sasha's. And it pretty much came down to autistic children being a button, which, it's kind of hard for a random guy to find. And of course,
okay.
Sexuality, like overt sexuality. Has she been a victim of rape and things like that? But
okay.
That was the only way I could get her to react, was to just be hardcore about it and push her buttons, and yeah.
Well, and it is funny because when you talk to other writers, it really is, our characters become real to us, and I don't mean it in a schizophrenic way. It's just they have their own voice and their own personality and their own motivations, and I just find that it's such a fascinating thing writing. You find the same thing?
Yeah, I totally agree. And for me, like I said, the characters really are king. And I've always written journals from the character's perspective. That's been a big way that I get to know my characters.
Okay.
And really exploring things from a day-to-day existence in their world. That was actually, I got into some trouble in that in high school because people did think that was weird, and my parents kind of flipped out about it.
Right. Well, it's like an imaginary friend, right?
Yeah, and it's well, I don't know what to tell you. This should be a legitimate way to express your creativity, but apparently there were some issues with that. So I'm really glad I'm an adult now and I can journal whatever I want.
Right. Well, I mean, with the things I discussed today, oh my God, if I was discussing this, 7 years ago or whatever when I was prosecuting cases, I think they would have thought I was an absolute insane nut. Because it's like, what do you mean characters talking to you or whatever? It's like, we need the science. Where'd the bullet go? not this kind of thing. But I find this just so fascinating that it seems like it's one of these fields you can be in that there's like no end to the challenges that you can deal with.
Yeah, definitely. And like when you look back on writing that you did like 5 years ago, like you can still think it's good, but at the same time you've just learned and grown so much, you probably would take it in a different direction now.
Yes. Well, I think also life experiences take us down different paths too that add to whatever we write. At least that's what I find.
Oh, I totally agree. Oh, I have a habit of starting a whole lot of projects. So I'll have like stories from years ago that I'll just like pick up, and the life experience I have now will suddenly make it a project I can actually finish.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that that's very true. And talking about the Canadians that time, the one he was a sergeant on the Toronto Police Force. He had a book that he had written, and it was published. It was The Glorious East Wind. His name was Chuck Conkle. Nicest guy. He could have been Anthony Hopkins' twin brother. Same mannerisms and, just that kind of guy that really like. And I'm not talking about the version of Hannibal Lecter, but just like a very serious man who, you can always tell that when you were talking to him, there was a lot going on behind those eyes. And he was talking to me about writing, and that was in the mid-'90s, and he said, when you really write, you basically have to have a couple of projects at the same time, because your brain just comes up with so many more ideas that you can't fit into what you're working on.
Yeah, it's really true. They spill over.
Yes. Like I have like 3 or 4 different novels started at this point, so I'm kind of bouncing back and forth one to the other. And well, of course, I'm working on your anthology story as well, so hopefully I'll have that done in a few days. I'm hoping that I can get that into the pipeline. So now you've done anthologies, right? A number of them?
Yeah, we're on the 3rd one for Starklight Press right now, and we also did a science fiction anthology, which is separate. The 3 for the Starklight anthologies are pure speculative fiction, so nearly anything goes. Okay.
So how did you get into doing that?
That was more my husband's idea than mine. That was pretty much his baby. What happened is that we had a mutual friend, and she wrote 10 different novels and had them all published by a reputable Canadian publisher, and came to the end of her contract, and she wanted to write some more stuff as an independent publisher herself.
Okay.
And the press she was with told her that they owned the characters, they owned her world, and she couldn't do anything without them.
Oh, Lord.
So she ended up spending about $30,000 buying back the rights to her own world.
Oh, jeez.
Which is substantially more than she ever got paid for it.
Right.
And we were watching all of this, and I was like, oh, wow, like this is part of why I don't put my stuff out there, because it's scary, it's hard, and you never know when you're going to sign that line that makes your soul just kind of go away.
Right.
And with the movie stuff, I was really careful. Like, I made sure that I had first right of refusal on it, and like if I wanted to, I could make a remake on them and stuff. But with novels, it's different. And my husband, he was like, you know what? Let's start our own press.
Okay. So that's how you started becoming a publisher yourself.
And so we invite other writers to come and share their story with us, but they retain the rights to their characters and their world and their stories.
Right.
So,
well, I mean, that's why you've almost got to be, you have to have some kind of legal knowledge that's kicking around in this field as well.
Yeah.
No, I used to say this in the music business particularly, because I've had some experience dealing with them, is that those record contracts were really draconian for an act. Oh, they may give you a lot of money in the advance, but it all has to come back. and then they own you for the first 5 albums. And how many bands get beyond 5 albums?
Yeah.
And then you end up having to sue them to, or they can sit on them. You do the album, but they don't promote it, they don't put it out, so you die on the limb.
Well, I was always very I always loved Van Morrison, and he sings a lot of songs about his experience in the music industry, and one of them is him singing about signing the dotted line and losing your soul.
Right.
And I always thought of that whenever anything creative came up, because I'd listened to Van Morrison since I'd been in junior high school. So having our own press kind of mitigates all of that, soul stripping, there goes your life and your essence sort of thing.
Right. Well, I always thought that was the most draconian thing, was controlling your characters in your world.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, because that is such a personal thing to each one of us that, you know. But, you got to be, that's why you've always got to be careful of the contracts you sign, because it can come back to bite you.
Exactly. And like anything we publish with any other authors, all of the stuff is a one-shot thing. Like the only thing we ask is that if they publish it somewhere else, that they mention it was published in a Starklight anthology first. Okay.
Well, I mean, that certainly sounds fair.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I had a sense from looking at your websites that, you and your husband are very supportive of new writers.
Yeah.
And so, do you take any of them under your wing? Do you?
Yes, definitely. We've hired a junior writer currently who's coming to work specifically on the GAF stuff, and she's very much a new writer. She's pretty much just written poetry before she started submitting stories to us.
Okay.
But now we're actually expanding so that we have a junior writer who can help out with all those other articles and stories and stuff.
So what is this GAF site that you're talking about?
It's short for the Galactic Armed Forces.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's a science fiction website where we put up a bunch of articles, encyclopedia articles, so you can get to know like the different quadrants, the different spaceships, the different characters. There's, stories, and that's where people also go to submit stuff to us for the GAF.
Okay. Well, that makes a lot of sense, because when you said GAF, there was a chemical company down here called GAF. So I was a little. The problem with acronyms is that each field has so many, and it has different meanings from one place to another.
We also picked the GAF originally when we were working it all out, because it's a double entendre, because something that you laugh about, you gaff about. So there's a bit of a double entendre that things are a little ludicrous and funny.
Well, I always think it's important to keep a sense of humor about all of these things.
You really have to.
Yeah.
I've met people who are too serious about their worlds, and it gets to be pretty much a world of one after a point.
Yeah. Well, what is the saying? You just can't take yourself too seriously.
No, you really can't.
So with, I'm just interested, when you are a publisher. So what does that all entail? Because you really have to take things from A to Z, right?
Yeah. The biggest thing is the slush pile. It's the huge mess of manuscripts that you get sent, and you have to go through and decide if they're worth reading or how you feel about it. And you can find something that's very promising, but it could need a lot of editing, and we do accept those. Most publishers don't.
Okay.
But, yeah. And that's part of how we work with newbies, is that, even if they need a lot of editing, so long as they're open to working with us on it and stuff, we will take it. Right.
Well, some people get so invested in everything they write that they get very persnickety about any changes to, their writing.
Yeah, and I understand, because any story you write, it's your child.
Right.
And
well, I've never, I mean, in my career, I had so many bosses that had to, they had to put their 2 cents in whatever you wrote, or I worked for governmental committees where I had, all the hoi polloi, psychiatrists and lawyers and judges and whatever. So you got used to a lot of people wanting to edit whatever you did.
Yeah.
And I never complain if what you do to it makes it better. And I'm always open to that, because if it makes it more understandable, because sometimes you can't see that you've confused somebody, and if it does all of that, I'm all for it. But when they're changing happy to glad and glad to happy, then it's just a waste of everybody's time.
I agree. For me, the biggest editing that I do is mostly I ask the writer why things have happened. And if they can't explain to me why something has occurred in real life, then I definitely feel that the story is failing.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. If someone picks a really unusual name for a character, for example, and if I were to ask them why they chose that name, if they couldn't give me a reason, I would seriously ask them to consider a more common name.
Right. Because it becomes a distraction.
Exactly. You need a reason in writing.
Yeah. Well, like I say, going back to all the angel names, that was part of my problem, was that, I would have really preferred to be able to say Dick, George, Sam, and Joe, but, because I think it is somewhat of a distraction. But you can't, it's like if they were royalty or whatever, you can't have Joe, Sam,
And you have a very clear-cut reason for your names.
Right.
Someone, they wanted to name a character after an Egyptian god.
Right.
And I said to them, okay, I have to ask you why this character is named this, and I have to tell you right off that as soon as people read this, they're going to think of Stargate.
Oh, yeah. That's true. Right. Yeah, well, you've got to keep things in mind in terms of everything else that is out there.
Yeah, and it's really easy to put that sort of thing into your writing without actually being conscious of what you're doing. I've caught myself doing the same thing. And, that's part of why it's nice to have an editor, is just someone to say why. And I think that really should be the only job an editor does, is to just ask you why.
Yeah, I agree. I've edited, different people over my career or whatever, and I always say I'll never change your voice. Well, my goal is to clarify whatever you have in there.
Yeah.
I don't need to read my own stuff again,
Exactly, yeah.
and sometimes I like the way somebody else, expresses themselves. It's refreshing.
Well, it is, and that's the point of, having a publishing house as opposed to just self-publishing, is that we want to hear other people's voices, and we want to have other people hear their voices too. So, definitely with taking new writers on, there is a fine line to walk, because they can have a great idea, but there can be a lot of polishing that needs to be done on it.
Right.
And that's where it gets a little dicey, but we do our best, so.
Well, yeah, I'm sure that's very challenging, having to sort through your slush pile. I hear that so much that, fortunately, I guess I was never exposed to that, so I just know that there must be a wide variety or range of what comes in. So, and then trying to read everything, that's got to be extremely time-consuming.
It is, and a lot of times, too, there can be stories that are perfectly good, but, that they just don't appeal to me personally. And That's kind of the point of having a press, is that you are promoting what appeals to you and hoping it sells. Right. And it's not a personal insult to people who we end up rejecting, because it's just, an issue of taste. Some days you feel like strawberry and some days you feel like chocolate, and that's the way it plays out. Right.
No, I agree with that 100%. No matter what field you're in, if it's not something that, I call it reverberates correctly with you, then you should pass on it and let somebody, take it on that, they've got a passion for it.
Exactly. If it fires us, we will promote someone endlessly, and that's the way we've got to feel about someone is we've got to feel like, yes, I can get excited about this.
Yes.
Not
Makes
that
a lot of sense.
cerebral, just like, oh, yes, that's a good story. I can appreciate this story. Like, I want to feel something in my heart, not my head when I read it.
Right. Well, I just know, like, going through, I had a minor in English. I really wanted the minor in history, but I went to Rutgers College, and you had to take a major, a minor, and a mini. So they had the different groupings of where the classes were. So history and psychology were considered humanities. And I don't know why English wasn't like in that kind of thing itself, but it's another story. So I couldn't minor in history. I could minor in English. And I remember reading a lot of English literature or whatever, and, these people are oohing and eyeing over it, and I'm going, oh, my God, this is really crap.
I know, huh?
Yeah, like, I really don't have much interest in this.
And you shouldn't have to force yourself. Like, just because it's a classic, you shouldn't have to force it.
And then I fouled myself up because, of course, I had to have so many credits in that area, and I did foul myself up. Actually, I had to go back for a whole other semester because I took a course in Dostoevsky, because Russian writers were, some of them were very fascinating to me, particularly Dostoevsky, because it was very psychological in what he wrote. So as I'm getting ready to graduate, I get called into the dean's office. They tell me I can't graduate. And I'm going, why? Because you haven't completed your English requirements. And so we go through the courses, and I go, well, why isn't the Dostoevsky course in there? That's not an English course. That's a Russian course.
Oh, wow. I so wouldn't have thought of that.
Me either. Trust me.
Oh, wow.
I was blindsided, and I was younger. I guess today I would have done some kind of appeal and argued with them, but it was good. It gave me, it gave me a little bit more I had more psychology courses before I was done, but and as I say, some writers really appealed to me, and then others were like Melville with that Moby Dick. It's like, oh my God, you've got to be kidding.
I know. I agree.
It just, this is not pleasurable reading, and I really don't care about learning how whaling was done in the 1850s. So,
yeah,
regardless of what the underlying theme may be behind that.
Yeah, and with that sort of book, like if you have it somewhere, like for me, Moby Dick ends up like a bathroom book.
Okay.
It's like, okay, well, like this is more interesting than reading the back of the shampoo bottle, so there we go.
Well, I guess all our old English professors would be rolling in their graves, at least in my case, so. Like,
they should be happy it's anywhere in the house, really.
Well, actually, I had a car accident at one time, and I actually read War and Peace while I was laying in the hospital bed. So it was one of the best sedatives you could ever read, put you right to sleep.
Nice.
But I got through it. But, it was a little bit of a struggle. So why don't you run through a little bit of the whole way that the publishing thing works? You get a manuscript, you edit it. So now what do you do for getting cover art in that?
Actually, my husband does most of the cover art. He does the drawings and sketches.
So he's got like a graphics art ability.
Yeah. He's a really, really talented artist. Like I'm always impressed. He can make people who look like people, and I can tell who they are, which is amazing to me.
Yes. Okay.
And on the actual Starklight anthologies, I actually ended up having some photos that we used for those. I kind of have an enjoyment for composition. I'm not sure if it's some sort of illness of the brain, but I do enjoy that.
Well, someplace around here are my initial drawings of the Archangel Jeremiel's first cover, and I passed that along to my publisher. They promptly hired an artist and did their own thing. I, of course, had to draw arrows. Jeremiel. I had to draw another arrow. Bushes. Another arrow. Mountain. So I guess I'm more of a Picasso kind of artist than I am
Oh, yeah.
than a realist. So that's it's good. I'm sure it's very good to have that in house to be able to do that. You
Definitely.
know.
That does really, really simplify things. Plus, again, it's our own bias because, I mean, I enjoy his pictures. He enjoys his pictures. And so far, we've sold out of all the runs of the books we've made. So obviously, other people must enjoy the pictures to some degree as well.
Yes. Well, I think that's one of the most important things about a book, other than the content, is that if the cover doesn't draw somebody, you never get past the thing sitting on the shelf.
I was at VCon, the Vancouver Science Fiction Convention, and there was this woman walking around, and there was another author sitting beside me, and he asked if he wanted to buy his book because he was sitting and kind of hawking them out from the table. And she was like, she said, "I'm sorry, I judge all books by their covers, and I would not buy that book." And I had a couple of Starklight books with me, and so I put them out in front of me, and I said, "Could I ask you if you'd buy any of these books?" And she looked through, and she said, "Probably, yes, maybe, yes."
Okay.
So I was very happy with that on-the-spot critique from a complete stranger.
Well, that's good. I mean, then you certainly are ringing true with, what you're doing. Now, you said you do runs, so do you, like, print, I'm going to say, like, traditionally, or do you do book-on-demand kind of things?
Usually what we've been doing is running about 500 books at a go.
Okay.
And we started off with, I think it was 150, but we did sell out of those runs really, really quickly. So we bumped it up to 500, and we just finished selling out of Starklight Anthology Volume 2. So that was a pretty impressive thing for us. In Canada, we have a very small market, so it's doing pretty good for yourself if you sell 500.
Yeah. Well, I know that's a whole different process. In my career, I've had to do, the kind of run prints where you have to go through mechanicals and all that. I assume they don't have to do mechanicals any longer, but it can be kind of labor intensive at that end too.
What's a mechanical?
Back in the day when you would have everything typeset and they'd make plates.
Okay.
And you'd give them the text and they would set all of this stuff into like full sheets, and then you had to go through. They would print you a copy, and then you would have to go through and then look for all the typos. So even if you gave them something that was pristine with no typos when they had it and they did the typesetting, sometimes typos would appear. So you wouldn't do the run until you went through all of that and checked it again. So, and those plates would be called mechanicals.
It's interesting because an author was telling me in one of the anthologies, I said there are a couple of typos in there, so we're still trying to work it out. And he said, "You don't need to worry about that." He said, "In every single publication now there are typos, and it's because we don't do things by typeset anymore."
Yeah, well, you don't have that second pass,
Yeah.
And I was reading Proof of Heaven, I think, with Eben Alexander, and there was a typo in that, and I'm like, how did that get through? You think the traditional publishers would have, had 5 people going through everything, but
it's remarkable what sneaks through. Like you go over it, and even so, there'll be like one little thing, and you're like, even spell check should have caught that one.
Well, my first book, In the Beginning, where I have the Almighty mentioned a lot in that book, I had decided that since it was the Almighty, that any time there was a reference to, I used him because it didn't fit. I don't think he's a male, but just by convention, I had him as him.
Right.
I decided to capitalize it. Well, what a nightmare that was. Because every time, it wasn't the hims and the he's half the time. It was anything that referenced, him in the sentence that if they were speaking to him and it was a "you're," right, that needed to be capitalized.
Right.
And when you read it, it reads, but
right. Yeah, that's a good
almost,
point. I wouldn't have thought of that either.
I thought I was developing a tick because I'd finish a sentence and I have to go back. Okay, now where? Who is this referring to? Is this referring? So I was constantly going back through that book. I don't know if I got all of them, to be honest with you, because the editor I had was really more for conceptual stuff and I guess some typos, but this was just like a weird thing for anybody to have to do. So if anybody reads my book and sees that I didn't capitalize it, I beg your forgiveness. I'll say 3 Hail Marys.
No doubt.
So now the other thing about you that's really interesting, you seem to do some acting.
I have acted, yes.
So how does that all fit into your writing, publishing, screenplay writing?
Well, pretty much it's, I really thought about being an actress, and doing that full time over writing because, again, the storytelling definitely seemed to me that it should be more of a, on stage sort of thing, a very evocative, as opposed to like behind the computer sort of business. But, a big problem I have with the conventional acting is that it boils down to you're just a mouthpiece. You're not actually a storyteller. You're a recording. And so I find that aspect of acting very frustrating. Nevertheless, it seems to just keep on kind of occurring around me. And, like I'll be asked to do something, and I am very theatrical and dramatic, so stuff just kind of happens around me, I guess.
Okay. Well, yeah, because I would think that acting you get to, but I mean you do get to do your own take on it too. That's got to be pretty creative in that form, right?
Yeah, and that's true. But I don't know. I went to acting school, and I found that it was very conservative, and a lot of it is because of Canada. And when you go to acting school in Canada, they're grooming you for things like commercials.
Oh,
okay. The Canadian market, it's like low budget movies and commercials mostly and stuff like that. So, my flair for the dramatic is actually really unappreciated, which is ironic and really, really disturbed me. And then I left and did some more writing.
Right. Yeah, well, I guess there would be a difference between, the countries. It just seems that Canada is so close to the United States. I would have thought that a lot of that was trickling back and forth.
Well,
Vancouver's Vancouver's almost your Hollywood, isn't it?
It is, but the market's really downsized there, and it is really commercial heavy. I'm a buxom redhead. I'm not someone who blends into the background. Like, they actually want you to be much more of a melange of people in order to be in commercials and that sort of thing. So I had a friend of mine in LA. I called him up because I was just in a state after being criticized for being too original, essentially. And I called him and I was crying, and he was like, "If you want to come down to LA, we'll welcome you here."
Yes. Yeah, because I think most actors that are successful have the ability to control, the frame they're in, right?
Yeah, and that's a real no-no if you're going to be in commercials.
Oh, yeah, I can't even imagine the commercial stuff. I mean, that's, I did the anti-drug commercials. That was a whole other thing. You're really more interested in the message, I think, than anything else.
Yeah, and you don't want to buck some redhead in a commercial like that. Like, that's not going to have a happy ending for me.
Well, I think it depends on the product, but, I don't know if you get all the insurance company ads that we get. We got that woman Flo or whatever for, It begins with a P, whatever the insurance
Oh,
company is.
yeah. I think that's the Progressive insurance.
Progressive, yeah.
Yeah,
It's like
that. He had like
that woman's lucky she got that job.
a commercial, something like that, where they're totally just, you know, like, okay, she has character, she's good for it, she's, you know, got this energy, and go with that. Like, I went down to New York, and I was just fooling around in New York and having some fun, and I saw an ad in the paper that was, you know, open casting call, actors wanted, and I was like, I'm gonna go just for fun. I was like fresh out of high school. I just like went down, and he was like, okay, read the script. So I read it to him. He said, okay, what was your last acting job? And I like started to laugh, and I was like, I think it was one of the tailors in The Emperor's New Clothes in a junior high production.
Okay.
His jaw dropped, and he said, you're not a professional actress? And I said, hell no.
Right.
And he said, we need to get you headshots right now. We need to get you in. I have an audition for you for Law and Order SVU.
Wow.
And he had it like down. And to be honest, it kind of scared me. It was kind of like this is all just happening too fast. This is kind of like a game I was playing, and you're taking it seriously. So I never followed through on it, and I pretty much bolted after that. And then I kind of thought about it for a while, and I was like, okay, maybe acting would be fun. And then I went back to it again.
Right.
But I don't know. I have a hard time really taking it intensely seriously. And I think if I wanted to, I'd have to like go down to Hollywood and get an agent and like be put through all of the mill and the grind that they put actors through. Yeah. And it's kind of scary and hardcore. So I'm kind of wimping out.
Well, I mean, some people, you know, have an easier path with that than others, but, you know, I think, you know, a lot of the Hollywood stuff has got its own, you know, it's got its own dark side, and then it's also got this, you know, thing that goes on all the time. They yes you to death, so you're never sure exactly what happened.
Yeah.
So.
I think I'd do better in New York than LA, to be honest.
Right. Well, I think a lot of actors, that's why they come to New York.
Well, it's got, you know, they love the character in New York.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. You never know what's going to come next, right?
No, you never do. And, you know, I keep on looking back over at the movies, and I do want to eventually branch back into doing movies, but from a writing sort of standpoint. And if there happens to be a role that looks cool, like, well, maybe I'll probably fall into temptation and jump into that.
Yeah. Well, I always kind of keep my options open. So I never intended to be doing this radio stuff.
And
this
here
was
you
not.
Are.
It wasn't part of my plan. So, you know, when they first offered it to me, he goes, "Oh, I'm too busy. I'm writing."
Exactly. Huh?
So, you know, like I say, you never know. You never know what step leads to the next step.
No, you never know. And I'm like a follow your heart sort of person, just doing it on impulse. And my husband is much, much more organized than me about everything. Like, honestly, I don't think the books would ever get actually through into the hard copy if it was totally on me. I'm really not the publisher. I'm really much more the editor person type girl.
Well, and I'm a firm believer in a team concept. You know, some people have a knack for doing, you know, this kind of work, and other people have a knack for the other, and a lot of times they don't. You couldn't interchange one with the other. And, you know, as long as everybody appreciates what the other person does, it seems to work pretty well.
Definitely.
And, you know, nothing really happens with just that I did it. So, you know, I mean, the books generally, you know, the hardest work in it, I think writing it, you know, has got to be done by a person or a couple of people. You can't have a committee.
No.
But, you know. But after that, then you have to have the right people as an editor, somebody that, you know, you can get along with, and, you know, you feel comfortable with your, you know, your baby that they're going to, you know, they're going to be in there meddling in it. You've really got to be comfortable with those people. And the same thing with a cover artist. You know, do they really get where your vision is, you know?
Exactly. It really is, you know, when you send your baby off to a publisher, it's like sending them off for major surgery. Like it's emotional. It's life altering if it goes badly.
Yes.
And
well, it's life altering if it goes well.
It is. Yeah, it's very true.
You know, I mean, I found for myself that, you know, my books are such an extension. I mean, you really expose a lot of your psyche in these things.
Oh, so much.
Yeah. Some people pick up on it, other people never know, but, you know, you'll know.
And other people read stuff into it that so isn't there, and you're just shocked by it.
Well, then it's effective too, isn't it that way?
It is. And like that's the way I look at it, is like when you put a story out there, people have a right to take whatever they want away from that, and you cannot control that. So at that point you just have to hope that it helps them, hope that, you know, it works for them, and not look at it too closely or you'll drive yourself mad.
Absolutely. I know with my stuff, I mean, taking on the angels was kind of presumptuous, I guess, but nobody else seemed to have done it. And, you know, my goal at the end wasn't that I was trying to write a catechism or, you know, the truth or any of that. Is that I wanted people to think about those things, you know, in a way that they wouldn't have thought about them before. And if that works, then that's success to me.
I think that you should have as a byline something to the effect of the man who went where angels fear to tread. I think that would really suit you.
Well, I'm working on my memoir, actually, and I was debating entitling it Dances with Angels or The Reluctant Phoenix. Because generally I've had kind of a up and down kind of life, and it's like I keep getting up, and I'm not so sure I want to. Oh.
I can relate to that. I've often thought that my motto in life should be just not dead yet.
Absolutely. So if you had to give like a new writer some kind of advice, what would you tell them?
Write. I would tell them to write. Stop talking about it. Stop thinking about it. Stop editing yourself. Just write. Get it down. It's the best advice you'll ever get. Like, what is the difference between a successful writer and an unsuccessful writer? A successful writer finished their book.
That's true. That's true.
And so many people don't seem to get that. Right.
And I think that self-censor sometimes just stops them dead.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the self-censor. That's, I gave the piece of advice to our junior writer about censorship. I said, when it comes down to sitting, it should just be you and the paper. You should not be thinking about what I'm going to say, what your readers are going to say, what anybody is going to say. It is just about you and that page.
Yes. Yes. It's good advice.
She said it helps, so.
Oh, it's very good advice. So I want you to go through your websites for me a little bit so you can tell us where we can find you.
Sure. There's gaffmainframe.com and darklightpress.com. And you can also find me at Tweets by BC on Twitter. And
great.
I'm kind of scattered around in a bunch of other places, but I have to find all my web addresses.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's at least some place they can connect in with you.
Yeah.
So, you know, as long as they have a place that they can find you, so that they can either send you more stuff to read, or, you know, converse with you, or put you on other radio shows, or maybe even offer you an acting job.
Maybe. It could happen. If you Google my name, Virginia Carraway Stark, I do come up a lot on the Internet. There's also apparently an awful lot of pictures of me on the Internet, so you find both of them if you just Google my whole name.
Well, that's good. So we'll look forward to seeing more of you. So if you just hold on a second, I will be right back with you.
Okay.
Thank you, Virginia.
Thank you.
For those listening, I want to say thanks to our-truth.com. You can find more information about me and my book series, The Archangel Jeremiel and the War to Conquer Heaven, at www.john-j-higgins.com. And the website for this radio show is www.hangingwithhiggins.com. Thank you for listening, and good night.